Over the past 3 months, my wife and I traveled to the Philippines, Australia, and New Zealand. By some divine miracle, we avoided the virus and the lockdowns that ensued, returning safely to New Zealand before their nationwide lockdown. This is our story. February 3rd, 2020, Ling and I left our place in Hamilton, New Zealand, drove up to Auckland Airport, and flew 10 hours direct from Auckland to Manila, Philippines. At this point in time, COVID-19 was on people's radar, but still a distant blip that only touched on a handful of Asian countries including China, Singapore, and South Korea. Airport regulations only concerned themselves with travelers coming from those countries. March 3rd, 2020. After a month of traveling around the Philippines, now accompanied by Ling's parents, we all boarded a Cebu Pacific plane and flew 8 hours direct from Manila to Melbourne, Australia. Halfway around the world, the US reported their first coronavirus death in Washington state. But otherwise, international travel was undisrupted, at least from my point of view. March 12, 2020. After 10 days of travel around Australia, we hopped on an Air New Zealand Flight 124, a 2-hour direct flight from Melbourne to Auckland to begin our 3-week tour, taking my in-laws around the beautiful country of New Zealand. On this day, Italy's COVID-19 death toll reached 827, a small number in comparison to the tens of thousands it would reach over the next 2 months. March 13, 2020. A day after flying out of Australia, the country goes into lockdown, cancelling the Australian Grand Prix. Just 2 days prior, we were in Melbourne, walking amongst the Scuderia Ferrari and Mercedes team merch kiosks, the city once alive with the buzz of the upcoming Grand Prix event. Now, it was all cancelled. Europe was now the official epicenter of the virus. The rise in panic in the US led to a different outbreak of empty shelves as panic buyers frantically stocked up on food items, hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes, and of course, toilet paper. It was extremely apparent at this point that my in-laws had to cut their trip short and fly back to Canada as soon as possible to avoid potential border shutdowns and/or last-minute flight cancellations. Not to mention the concern over their age, which put them in the COVID-19 high-risk bracket.
The CDC and public health has come out about particularly elderly people are at higher risk of this virus making them very sick.
Without delay, Ling went online and bumped up their flight from April 1st to March 25th as flight availability was quickly dropping and ticket prices were beginning to mount. Soon after, Air New Zealand announced that all international flights from April to June would be cancelled. Another dodged bullet thanks to Ling's quick reaction. March 16, 2020, President of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte, imposes an enhanced community quarantine, placing the Luzon region in a total lockdown. March 23, 2020, now holed up in Rotorua, New Zealand, killing time in self-isolation, counting down the days until Ling's parents could fly out of Auckland. Jacinda Ardern announced to the nation that in 48 hours, New Zealand would enter Alert Level 4, the highest alert level, shutting down the entire country, closing borders to all but foreign nationals, and forcing people to self-isolate for at least 4 weeks. The lockdown would take effect at 11:59 p.m. Wednesday night. My in-laws were scheduled to fly at 8 p.m. that same evening, just 3 hours before the lockdown. The focus now shifted back to Ling and myself. The lockdown meant that everyone in the country had to stay in their homes and remain in their bubble until told otherwise. The problem was that Ling and I didn't have a home as we ended the lease on our place in Hamilton right before flying to the Philippines back in February. I immediately got on the phone with our former property manager, desperately hoping to secure our old place so we could prepare for the minimum 4-week self-isolation. He delivered the grim news that the real estate office was officially shut down, with all tenant contracts put on hold, meaning tenants couldn't move in or out until further notice. We were stuck without a place to self-isolate, and we had 48 hours to figure something out. We tried working something out with the owner of the Airbnb we were occupying in Rotorua, but to no avail as the owner's daughter was returning home for the lockdown and would need the unit. Ling reached out to another Airbnb host in Hamilton, but this too was declined. We eventually landed a 2-week booking at an Airbnb which would only cover half of the 4-week self-isolation period. This was headway for us, but at the same time we had to figure out where we would go once those 2 weeks were up. While this was going on, Ling and I both reached out to our former employers in Hamilton to inquire about re-employment and working remotely during the lockdown. My former boss advised me that they couldn't take me back due to the lockdown as they were now cutting employees and not hiring. March 25th, 2020. With less than 12 hours before the lockdown, we left Rotorua and drove up to Auckland Airport to drop Ling's parents off. The once bustling airport was now eerily empty. Our main concern was the safety of Ling's parents, as I conjured up images I had seen earlier on Twitter of Chicago O'Hare Airport. Travelers packed together in corridors and escalators like sardines for 6 hours, bottlenecked for coronavirus screenings, doing everything but social distancing. We said our goodbyes, crossed our fingers, and got back in the car to drive an hour and 45 minutes back to Hamilton. On the drive back, Ling got a phone call from her former employer. Her request was accepted as they announced that they would rehire her to work from home. A wave of relief washed over us as this meant that we had a stream of income coming in. Now we just had to tackle the gap in our accommodation issue. March 26, 2020. With the level 4 nationwide lockdown officially in effect, we got to work on sorting out our self-isolation unit. With the lockdown, we felt confident that whoever booked the unit after us in mid-April onward would surely cancel, as international and domestic travel was now banned indefinitely. The Airbnb unit owner reached out to the woman who booked the unit to reconfirm her stay. Several days passed, and with no word from her, it soon became apparent that her booking was going to be cancelled. The final weight was lifted off our shoulders, as we now could lock in the unit and book it for as long as we were required to stay in our bubble. I always joked before leaving my home in Canada that in the event of a global pandemic, given its small population of 4.8 million people and geographic isolation, strategically, New Zealand would be the best place to be. Here we are now, a year and a half later, living out that reality.